When I first started my own nonprofit organization, I knew very little about boards and how they could effectively support the organization. But as I launched the nonprofit and it grew over time, I generally saw the difference between two different kinds of boards of directors, and that's a working board and a governing board. I also figured out that knowing the difference between a working board and a governing board, especially what kind your organization needs and when, is really important because it can influence things like what activities your board spends their time on, how they interact with their CEO and staff, and how you manage your board of directors. So that's what we're going to spend our time on in this video. I'm going to talk you through these two types of boards, working board versus governing board. We'll talk through what these boards do, what types of activities they spend most of their time on, and most importantly, how to know which kind of board your organization needs based on what stage it is in. Welcome back. I'm Amber Melanie Smith. I'm a nonprofit founder, former executive director, and I make these videos on YouTube all about nonprofits, fundraising, board service, changing the world in all sorts of ways. So don't be shy. Check out my 200 plus other videos on my channel all about these topics. If you're not already part of my newsletter, don't forget to subscribe to that. The link to do so is below, but you don't want to miss out because I send out how-to guides, actionable tips, funding opportunities, and other resources. And yeah, it's just a good time. And you can unsubscribe anytime it's not bringing value to you. And of course, if you want more training and resources, you can also check out my website, foundertofulltime.com. All right, let's get into this here. I'm going to talk through what each of these types of boards are, what they spend their time on, and again, how you can know which one you need and when. Let's start with the working board of directors. When I first started my own nonprofit years ago, I had a working board of directors. In fact, most people starting a nonprofit are going to start with a working board of directors. And that's because working boards are most common in organizations that have few to zero paid staff, or small amount of resources, or just in that startup or growth phase. Let's talk about how that works and why that is. Here are the most common working board activities. Working boards provide hands-on support and operational support as well. So it's like they're acting as if they are the staff of the organization because the organization doesn't have other paid staff. These people might be doing anything from managing the actual programs of the organization. So if you're a hunger relief organization, your working board members might be doing anything from literally handing out food to overseeing the volunteers who are handing out the food. In addition to executing on the programs, these working board members are going to be doing the fundraising, the administrative support, and accounting and marketing and event planning and all of the stuff, just like their staff. Except, of course, without being paid because board members are typically unpaid volunteers, of course. In terms of the time commitment working boards can expect to put into the organization, let's think about that. There's going to be a high time commitment because they're not just overseeing the programming and doing the marketing and the accounting and all that stuff. They're also trying to put in place things that a board needs, like policy and strategy and a little bit longer term vision if possible. Who is well suited to a working board? Let's talk about potential members for this kind of board. When you're talking about members for a working board, you might be thinking about people who have these direct skill sets. So I talked about marketing before, so maybe you want someone who's good at marketing on your working board. I talked about executing on programs, so maybe you want experts in that type of programming on your board. It's really thinking about who do you need to fulfill these current duties as board members. The other thing about a working board is because the organization doesn't have paid staff to handle the day-to-day, they need to be a little bit versatile because they might be wearing many hats. Like I said before, maybe you've got board members supporting the marketing or the programming, but these people are also the same people who need to be thinking about some of the infrastructure and policy development for the organization that's going to fulfill their other fiduciary duties as board members. When we're thinking about the types of things these board members might be talking about in meetings or the structure of these board meetings, we're talking about a lot of operational stuff. So immediate or operational issues like, where are we going to get a truck to deliver all this food? Stuff like that. You might also see less formal committees in a working board just because everyone is required to be a little bit more versatile and agile. The decision-making process would be pretty collaborative. There might be ad hoc committees or task-based or project-based committees that pop up to handle specific issues like this is going to be the team that is charged with figuring out where to get that truck to deliver all the food, something like that. Let's just talk about a couple of the indicators that a working board is the right fit for your organization at its current stage. Just a quick note that there's no hard and fast rule about how many years an organization should have in a working board phase versus a governing board phase. It really just depends on how your organization has grown at that time and what kind of infrastructure it has in place or needs. Following things sound like your organization, then a working board is probably the right fit for you. One, you've got limited staff resources. Maybe you have no paid staff or just 1 or 2 paid staff. So then this means that your working board members would be taking on some of the roles of staff in terms of marketing, program support, etc. 2, you've got a large amount of operational needs that can't be handled by any staff that you do have, if you have any staff at all. 3rd, you've got a really tight or small budget at this time, which means that you can't afford to hire staff, so that necessitates some board volunteer work as a working board. 4, maybe you have a skills gap in your staff, again, if you have staff at all. You don't have the right expert in place to handle this specific area of the organization, which means that you're relying on the board's expertise and operational help. 5, you're at a point where you're going to need to make some quick decisions and frequently, so maybe board meetings are even happening weekly or bi-weekly at this stage in the organization. Things need to be decided on quickly to keep up with the organization's startup or growth phase. And 6, you're generally a smaller organization. You've got small scale operations, so again, paid staff isn't really possible right now. So how does all that differ from a governing board? Let's talk about that now. So typically a board would be evolving or transitioning from a working board into a governing board model as the organization grows and gains more staff capacity, and that staff is able to handle the day-to-day operations of the organization so the board doesn't have to anymore. So let's just quickly talk through the signs that your organization is ready to make that jump from working board to governing board. The first is there's a growth in staff support. You've got several staff who are handling the day-to-day operations of the organization, from executing on the programs to handling the behind-the-scenes administration, and maybe it even feels like at some point in this evolution, your board and your staff are duplicating efforts. Second indicator is your organization has some level of financial stability. So you've got revenue that you can count on for the most part coming in month to month. You have diverse revenue streams that are protecting you from something bad happening to drop one of those revenue streams. You've got some consistency and reliability in your revenue. Third is you've got some infrastructure around fundraising. So that could mean you've got fundraising staff, but also systems like fundraising software, donor stewardship plans and processes, etc., which means that the board might be better using their time going out to their networks and supporting fundraising than managing the operations. Fourth is you've got some strategic long-term needs for the organization. You're at a point where it doesn't feel like you can only focus on the day-to-day. You want to start thinking long-term, 3, 4, 5 years into the future. So those strategic needs necessitate a board that thinks a little bit differently, thinks on a higher level, thinks more strategically instead of just about the day-to-day operations. The fifth indicator is that the operations of your organization are just more complex, and it would just be too hard for volunteer board members to keep up with the complexity of your organizational structure. And the sixth indicator is just how your board is feeling, how they're feeling engaged. Maybe they're at a point where they're tired of doing the operations and day-to-day stuff too, and they just feel like their time and talents would be better used on a higher level strategy way of thinking. Or you don't have the right board members in place to be a governing board, and it's time to recruit board members who can think in that way instead of in a day-to-day operating mindset. Let's talk about what a governing board actually does. The first thing is a lot of fundraising. So if you've got staff to handle the operations, the programs, the day-to-day, and support fundraising, the board really needs to be spending a lot more of their time thinking about how to bring in resources to support the organization. So building new connections, meeting with donors, building relationships, sometimes supporting making the ask. The board spending their time in this way is really helpful to an organization at this stage. The second thing that a governing board focuses on is that long-term strategy like we talked about before. So setting the direction, the big picture policies, the strategic planning of the organization in collaboration with staff. So thinking about the future of the organization instead of the present. Then there's the governance stuff. The board, whether it's a working board or governing board, should be working very closely and in collaboration with any staff that are in the organization, especially the organization's CEO or executive director. So at this level especially, the board is charged with being a good partner to the CEO and supporting the CEO and executive director, whichever one you want to call them. They're basically the same thing. Supporting that leader and making sure that the budgets that the board approves are going to be sufficiently supportive of that leader's needs. In terms of the time commitment for this kind of board, you might see it being a little bit lower because instead of having to deal with the daily fires or the operations of the organization, they might be able to meet once a month or once a quarter or a couple times a year to just talk about the higher level strategy needs of the organization while the staff is charged with managing the day-to-day. You're also going to be looking for slightly different skill sets for board members on this kind of board. You want to find people who have expertise in governance, especially nonprofit governance, long-term strategic thinking, finance, financial planning, legal expertise is always helpful, and especially fundraising experience. Like I said, these board members really should be out there leveraging their networks and building new connections to bring in more resources into the organization so the staff can continue to do its job. As far as the structure of a governing board, it's going to be a little bit more structured than a working board potentially. Like I said, because they're going to be focusing more on the high level policy, the strategy of the organization. They're going to be delegating the operational stuff like the marketing, the program management, etc., to the staff of the organization at that point. And you also might see more formal committees in this type of board as well. A common example of committee is a finance committee. So that committee might be focused on making sure that the finances of the organization are in good health, but also thinking long-term about investing and how to grow the finances. I'm curious what stage of organization you are at. Are you a startup or an organization that is best suited for a working board or a governing board? I'd love to hear what are some of the benefits of either that you've seen or some of the challenges. Share in the comments below. Like I said at the beginning, if you're starting a nonprofit or developing a fundraising strategy, I've got some great resources on my website, foundertofulltime.com. And I'm also going to be sending out a lot of good stuff through my newsletter. So you can subscribe to that using the link below this video. Finally, I have a group on Facebook called Change the World or Bust. We've got thousands of people in there from around the world, and we'd love to have you join our little Changemaker community. So come out and join us there, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.